Okay, Ms. David, go ahead.
Mahalo. First of all, I'd like to welcome Justice Mike Wilson to come to the table, please, sir, while I give a very short background description. And I'd like to welcome you first to the West Hawaii Civic Center and for give our thanks to you, our great mahalo, for providing this community and this council with some important information about this newly formed specialized court. Just a brief statement, Justice Wilson was very instrumental in developing environmental court. And for me and for most of the people here, I believe it's very timely and it's appropriate that we have established an environmental court here on this island, because most of our natural and cultural resources are totally interdependent upon each other, and so we need to respect that. Justice Wilson was appointed in 2014. He was also the former director of the Department of Land and Natural Resources, chair of the BLNR, chair of the State Water Commission, trustee of Kaho'olawe Island Reserve Commission, and the First Circuit Court judge since May 2000. With that said, welcome, and you may proceed, Justice Wilson.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I just want to say aloha to the County Council and mention what an honor it is to be here. It's truly a wonderful opportunity that you provided to our Supreme Court, and on behalf of the Supreme Court, I want to thank you. So let me just say good morning to Councilman Onishi and Councilwoman Wiley and Councilman Chung, as well as Councilwoman Yoff. And Mr. Chair, I've had the pleasure of already talking to you a bit about this when we had our municipal attorneys conference. And also Councilwoman Poindexter, thank you for your warm aloha. And Councilman Paleka, thank you for making me feel even more comfortable because you're wearing a Hawaiian Forest shirt that was made by Craig Neff. I appreciate that. And thank you again, Madam Chair. And Councilman Iligan, thank you for your invitation. And Mr. Clerk, I had a chance to meet you, so thank you, John, for your hospitality. I'm always excited to come to the Big Island since I grew up in Kailua and had a chance to get into the ocean quite a bit, and then I managed to get to the Big Island when I was pretty small. And since then, I've had a chance to come back here many times and always feel when I land that I'm in the midst of something powerful and beautiful. And that's part of what this presentation's about. I did give a presentation at the Municipal Attorneys Conference, and that was fun, in part because Molly Stebbins, our corporation counsel, is my former law clerk, so I know I'm in good hands when I see her in the vicinity as well. But with that said, I'm anxious to answer any questions you might have, and I will give you my PowerPoint. This is about Hawaii's environmental court, and the theme that you can see on the screen is Community Seeks Help from the Judiciary. It's kind of a way to start and get some perspective on what has happened here, because what we're talking about, of course, is something that is just a remarkable treasure for the entire world. And it is something that has gotten international attention, but especially local attention from the community that moved to the legislature, went to the legislature and asked for help by creating an environmental court. This is Hawaiian Islands from space. It kind of reminds us just what exactly we're talking about that created this magnificent new institution. And this is astronaut Chuck Brady, who in 1996 had been in space longer than any other person on Earth. And during that time, he was watching the Earth rotate every hour or so, and he developed a real sense of anxiety because he saw what was happening in terms of the deterioration of the Earth. And he felt that all the things that were most important to him in life were to some extent under siege. That is, his family, his community, his nation. But when he was looking out of the space capsule, he would see Hawaii, and he determined it was the most beautiful place on Earth. And it always gave him more of a sense of peace when he saw it. And he made a pact with himself to come to Hawaii and thank those that were taking care of Hawaii and to talk about his feeling for the place. So I was very fortunate to be in charge of the Department of Land and Natural Resources when he came to Earth and came to Hawaii, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service told me there's an astronaut that wanted to talk about how magnificent Hawaii was. I wasn't sure if that was a practical joke because at that time we had many issues that were before the department that had to do with whether we were taking care of Hawaii. But sure enough, here he was, and he was a terrific person who made this wonderful statement that gives us a perspective about just how magnificent this place is globally. These are reminder slides that I like to provide when I'm speaking about the Environmental Court, because after all, it's a court that's meant to address some resources that have a certain magic to them. You know, we are the most remote landmass on Earth, and every single second we have the most powerful cleansing agents on Earth working on these islands. We've got, of course, the sun. We have the cleanest air, since we're the most remote landmass on Earth, the cleanest ocean. And all of this is impacting us regardless of human activity. We have these wonderful agents taking place. The kind of iconic images that the world sees are valid demonstrations of what culturally, environmentally, and I guess you could say uniquely, we get a chance to experience every single day at the level. And it's really exciting to be in front of you because you're the kahu of this island, and this is an incredible island. And I know over the years, just looking at the way that the Big Island and some of the other islands are still very focused on a resource future is pretty inspiring. So that's another reason why I really appreciate being here, and why these pictures, I'm sure, aren't something that are any surprise to you. This is a magnificent bay on Oahu that still exists, and this is maybe a cultural center on Oahu where the Hawaiian population was most concentrated, Kawanui Marsh, which is only here because of repeated efforts for a couple of decades on the parts of the community to have it be a marsh rather than a shopping center. It involves issues of endangered species and animals that are signature animals in the ocean. You couldn't have a humpback whale unless you had a terrifically healthy ecosystem surrounding it. Some of our forest birds, as you know, thank you, are suffering because of climate change and other reasons, and the attraction of animals, cetaceans, like not just whales, but dolphins is one of the things that makes this an extraordinary place. So moving from this sort of big picture about what's happening every day in the from the point of view of the natural resources to the resources that aren't quite as natural, that are human-centered, we're speaking about our community here in Hawaii and how they're reacting not just to the resources but the need to protect them. I cite this, I'll talk a little bit more about India, because India has certainly noticed Hawaii. And while I was there, this was a quote that seemed to be one of the most, if not the most quoted of all of the many remarkable statements that were made by the father of India, Mahatma Gandhi. And he said, "A small body of determined spirits fired by an unquenchable faith in their mission can alter the course of history." Anybody that's lived in Hawaii understands that every now and then the community steps forward, or somebody steps forward, and can make a big difference. Jan Dapatan is perhaps the mother of the Environmental Court. She's from Maui, and for many years she worked with Keep the Hawaiian Islands Beautiful, and she also was very committed to the idea of having environmental court. So year after year she discussed it with the legislature, and she was very patient. And this is a sort of thing that she was seeing on her island. This is the water challenges for Maui and Oahu are so significant that to some extent it's starting to catch the attention of the public. So with respect to Maui, the Iao Aquifer, one of their main aquifers, shows that the water levels have declined to nearly 1/2 of the pre-development water levels. The very important statistic, given that the island of Maui, like the rest of our islands, is so far from another water source, being in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, that if we aren't able to sustain our aquifers, it will be a tremendous impediment to the quality of life, because we'll have to pay so much to replace them with desalination. Pearl Harbor Aquifer. This is really one of the miracles, geologic miracles on Earth. It is a remarkable geologic source. It underlies the island of Oahu. It's a huge lake. It supplies 100 million gallons of water every day, if you can imagine that. Just an island as small as Oahu, that it would have an underground lens of that magnitude. But nonetheless, given the state of management, you can see that these are statistics from the federal government Geologic Survey. It says groundwater head levels in Pearl Harbor, which supplies 60% of Oahu's municipal water, have declined by half. These are the sort of issues that I think have caught the attention of the community. As we all know, the underground aquifers depend on watersheds, the watersheds that capture the water. Hawaii has already lost half of its natural forest cover. Forested lands are our island's primary watersheds. And I know I'm speaking to the converted about this, but in trying to give background on the environmental court and what's happening with the community, they see, which I know you see, which is that we really aren't going to be able to provide all these services and have a quality of life that is the same, at least as good, if it turns out that the most important natural resource that we have in the state of Hawaii, drinking water, is depleted to the point where sustainability is a problem. Global warming. This is a word that I know you probably have used many times. You know, I went to Kailua High School. When I graduated from Kailua High School, I can safely say that I had never used the word environment, I think. Now, even if you can't graduate, you will know what the word environment means. There are these new words that kind of become part of our life, I guess. And here's a new word, global warming. Global warming, especially for islands, is one that's used a lot, and it's a word that I just cite this slide because we've got the mayor of Honolulu talking about a possible tax that deals with global warming and talking about Waikiki. And he says sea level rising, and this pertains to the beaches around Waikiki, the sea level rising continues to cause erosion on a regular basis. And he makes the point about how, you know, the beach obviously brings in billions in revenues. Well, you know, if your concern is limited to the idea of economic success, the amount of money that we can put into the economy, and you limit your concern about our natural resources to simply the economic model without taking into consideration the sort of the spiritual, psychological, cultural importance that I know really makes a difference on the Big Island, even if your analysis is purely economic, global warming and resource management are key issues for the future of the state, and these are issues that will be front and center in the environmental court. So let's talk a bit about the unique Hawaii laws that go along with this magnificent, unique treasure we have, our natural resources. Something has already happened culturally in terms of the way we define ourselves legally with respect to the land. This state motto, which I've heard repeated many, many times by members of the community, life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness. So if you try to get a perspective on what a fascinating, special, kind of original idea this is, you can look around the other 50 states and see, do they define themselves in a way that is so connected to the land? With respect to our Constitution, we have some unique provisions. And here is an interesting provision that makes a big difference in defining us at the highest level, legal level, constitutional level. It's Article 1, Section 7 says that Hawaii's natural beauty is a natural resource. Only state in the country. We define it along with land, water, air, minerals, and energy sources, which is the traditional natural resource selection in constitutions around the country. But we've added to it Hawaii's natural beauty, understanding the significance of something that goes beyond perhaps just the raw economic value that's provided. Here's Article 1, Section 9 that provides for a right to a clean and healthful environment. Again, this is a modern model, as you can imagine. Constitutions traditionally, if you go back 20 years, haven't had this kind of a provision. And we're one of 6 that actually makes this a right to a clean and healthful environment, a meaningful right. It's not just cited as a matter of general public policy, an actual legal basis for citizens to bring action to enforce their right to a clean and healthful environment. This is a unique provision of the Constitution. It's a very special one. You will be hard-pressed to find in the Constitution of other states the elevation of culture to the level of constitutional significance. And this is Article 12, Section 7, that gives constitutional importance to Hawaiian culture. With this background of a magnificent environment and this background of some pretty strong laws that are fairly unique to Hawaii to protect the natural resources, we come to the Environmental Court. You use the term over and over again in like environmental court. Maybe it's like the word Hawaii, and sometimes it just blends into the rest of the words and doesn't make a difference. I think all of us in this room, if we say Hawaii, I don't know, maybe in a way where it's a private moment, there's something special we feel just by saying Hawaii. I know that there are a lot of people that feel that way on this island, so it's great. It's a great word, and it can't be overused in many ways. Environmental court is another one of those words I think that many people feel, especially the team that I'm going to talk about that helped put the environmental court together, that includes for example, Judge Ibarra, who, as you know, is one of the great judicial powers in the state, who we all look up to, and he's been a real leader in helping put this together. Okay, so here's the bill that was put together in the legislature with the help of the community. And it says, and this is the purpose of the bill, Hawaii's natural resources are compromised every day, resulting in numerous violations of the law. This is an official legislative finding. An environmental court will better ensure that the state upholds its constitutional obligation to protect the public trust for the benefit of all beneficiaries. The purpose of this act is to promote and protect Hawaii's natural environment through consistent and uniform application of environmental laws by establishing environmental courts. What an unusual court this is. As you'll see, what's happened is it's created a special court. In other words, you have to be an environmental court judge to hear these cases. You have to be trained as an environmental court judge for the state of Hawaii if you're going to hear these cases. And the Chief Justice, and I guess you could say on his behalf the judiciary, can assign to the environmental court any case that's deemed by the environmental court judge to involve environmental issues. But other than this catch-all phrase, maybe even more importantly, is this very powerful part of the law that's a jurisdictional part of the law that really sets us apart from other environmental courts in the United States. There's really only one that would have the reach of a statewide court. 60 chapters. This is a slide that Judge Ibarra allowed me to use. He had put it together in one of his presentations. It's a great slide. And it points out that 60 chapters of the Hawaii Revised Statutes are covered by this law. Okay, what does that mean to be covered by? What it means is each of these chapters are chapters that are considered by the environmental court, only the environmental court. If you think about all the things that are issues that you've heard about that involve land, air, water, culture, it's breathtaking. It's a very, very far-reaching institution. And it covers civil and criminal. So if there's illegal taking, now one of the things that distinguishes this island and shows the extent to which the community is vigilant, one of the many things are your fish replenishment areas. You know, they were put together by the local community, the Hawaiian community, along with the recreational fishing industry, the recreational dive industry. And that kind of priority being placed on an area that has important significance for fish replenishment means that there would be enforcement, which would mean if somebody's violating those rules, that could be a criminal violation, and so it would go to the environmental court. That's a criminal violation, for example. On the other hand, let's say there's a civil question. You've got Ualapalakua Ranch, this magnificent ahupua'a that has a lowland rainforest that, a dry lowland forest that's a treasure. Well, if there was going to be a proposal for that area to be used in a certain way, whether or not it's for educational, whether it's for purposes of commercial development, the kind of regulatory issues that would come up in civil court, for example, could apply to that. And this court has been going since July 1st. We already have about 119 cases. It's active statewide. So why would this attract international support, this kind of a court? This is a representative from the Supreme Court of India. He was on the Supreme Court of India. And just to step back for a second about the connection between India and Hawaii, it has a lot to do with the Environmental Court because they have the most powerful environmental court in the world. And it was created by their court to take care of, again, a whole reach of cases, a whole civil and criminal jurisdictional group of cases. So what have they done? Their court is so extraordinary, they ordered the cleanup of the air of New Delhi, which at one time was the dirtiest city, and they ordered that all two-stroke engines be removed. This is a city that's got 20 million people. That was a very bold undertaking, which has worked in cleaning the air up. I mean, there was cooperation on the part of the government when that was issued. The Ganges River is a sacred river. We have some sacred resources. The Ganges River is obviously important to the Hindu society, and the court ordered that the contamination of the Ganges River be halted. That's another breathtaking sort of order from a court. And then finally, I'll cite as an example rat hole mining. Rat hole mining was a widespread practice by the extraction industry in India that takes minerals from the ground. It's a billion-dollar industry that has great influence in government. And their practice was to give shovels to boys, and the boys would dig out the coal. And after they dug out the coal would be processed in a way that was poisonous. So the boys died young, the water table was poisoned, the adjacent river was poisoned. So on its own, the Supreme Court issued the cessation or the stopping of rat hole mining. This is the type of thing that has created a reaction on the part of government. And there's an effort in India to try to change now the way judges are appointed and to take away the power of the environmental court. Wherever we go and say that we're from Hawaii, there is this notion that we are in a place that's extraordinary. And in India, keeping in mind this is a country with 1.4 billion people with its legal system where all the courts are under one court, and their Supreme Court has only 26 justices. They noticed Hawaii. They wanted Hawaii to be present. And part of the reason is because Hawaii is an example of what the world community can achieve if we are taking care of our natural environment. More specifically, the discussion that we had to do with, think for a moment globally. The global citizens. We think globally the power of countries, the power of political organizations pretty much focuses on the United States, China, India. But if you look from the point of view of the citizen that can think in a global or kind of a worldwide way about their ideal environment, the discussions that we were having among the justices sort of focused on the idea that, Hawaii probably stands out on the whole earth, like Chuck Brady was talking about, because the ecosystems that people are attracted to, the Arctic's a nice one, and the desert's an interesting ecosystem, but that's not in the mind of the common citizen as much as a beach ecosystem. And when beaches are thought about in beautiful ocean settings, you've got the Mediterranean, you have the Caribbean, you've got the Great Barrier Reef. There are wonderful places, but the one that stands out the most is
Hawaii. So why is that important from the point of view of globally international law? Because this idea of applying the international rule of law, which they're having difficulty doing in India to some extent, is something that can be aided by having a place like Hawaii that seems to be an institution that works, and to have an environment that people can strive for, as opposed to the environmental debate that usually takes place with respect to disasters. You know, the Tohoku earthquake, or you look at the deterioration of the leading force in the world in the Amazon, or the discussion we had about the contamination of the Gulf of Mexico, or the kind of oil contamination that took place in Santa Barbara. These are epic negative ideas that drive the discussions about environmental law internationally. It's nice, a counterpoint, something that's positive, that allows for the kind of imagination that's an accurate imagination that Chuck Brady had from space. So, Antonio Benjamin, like Justice Kumar, has noticed what's been happening in Hawaii, and he is perhaps the leading jurist of international environmental law in the world, and he's on the Supreme Court of Brazil. And I had an opportunity to spend a fair amount of time with him in Brazil, and now he has agreed to be a visiting scholar at the University of Hawaii. He'll be coming to the University of Hawaii Law School next year. All of these individuals from around the world volunteered to train our environmental court judges. They were part of the presentation to our environmental court judges. They stepped forward, and believe you can imagine how busy they are, but they were more than happy to do it because they believe in the institution. They see that our environmental court is by far the one with the most promise, and of course it's a court that's meant to take care of. These are individuals who pay attention to natural resources globally, so they too share that moment, I guess you could say, that people have when you say you're from Hawaii. These are two wonderful people that we are lucky to have in Hawaii. Dean Soifer and Assistant Dean Antolini went with me to India and met with the Green Tribunal, and they were very instrumental in putting together the training program for environmental court judges. And, you know, they are just so gracious, gracious and, I don't know, thoughtful. I mean, I really enjoy their leadership, and they helped organize the visit of Antonio Benjamin, who will be staying here in Hawaii. Now, there is a conference that's about to take place in Hawaii that it seems like it's just a wonderful, perfect storm that's occurred in Hawaii to be able to give us some help with our natural resources internationally. And that's the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. Antonio Benjamin's in charge of their legal commission. About 7,000 people are going to be appearing in September from all around the world, representing all the countries of the world, all the nonprofits of the world involved in conservation. And when that conference takes place, it will bring a lot of attention to Hawaii and bring us a lot of help. And both Dean Soifer and Dean Antolini have been very helpful in putting that program together. And I was elected the chief election officer for the organization, so that means that they were desperate for a chief elections officer. No, actually, they had to have somebody from Hawaii, so I was honored to be elected. All right, I'm about finished. There's only, I think, 2 slides left. I like to put this up because we need models and representatives of what can be in the future. On the left is Zeus. Zeus is, by all accounts, a very important god, and he stands out as somebody that, of course, is fearless and strong. And he also has a tool. He's got his special, I guess, tool of justice. And Zeus represents the male part of the legal profession in Hawaii. We have in Hawaii a lot of people that have gone to law school that care about natural resources. I guess if you have a lot of people going to school in New York City, you'll have a lot of people that care about finances. But it just turns out in Hawaii we've produced some really great people who care about these issues. And then on the right is Joan of Arc. We talked before at the municipal conference about this, and I guess I should disclose that I didn't put this together because of its looking so much like Molly. If you look at it, you see it looks like Molly Stebbins, but it didn't really have anything to do with Molly. And Joan of Arc is representing the female legal part of our population that has, wonderful, brave lawyers too. And of course, you see she's got her own instrument of justice with her. So what's an instrument of justice? In our state, we now have a new institution, an instrument of justice called the Environmental Court. It's an environmental court that has been forged by a tremendous team that's been put together, and with the team being led in part by our chief judges, Judge Ibarra and Judge Cardoza from Maui, as well as Judge Chang from the island of Oahu, and then Judge Valenciano from Kauai, and their staff, and the prosecutors, and the public defenders, and the corporation councils. It's really been an exciting process. But to some extent, we are just a vehicle, and it's a vehicle for leaders like yourself, and I am so grateful that you allowed me to come and speak to you, because I know that your view of the Environmental Court will make a difference. How much do you want to support it? From your branch of government, you'll define it in the future, and you'll be defining it in some ways for the whole world.
What is the structure of this environmental court? If you can explain to us how this actually works.
Okay. Just in terms of the specifics of how it's put together, the Chief Justice designates environmental court judges to hear the cases, okay, and the cases from these statutes. So that means that he will pick judges at the circuit court level, and in this case, certainly with the consultation of the chief judges. And then those individuals are designated as environmental court judges, and they have placed on their calendar the cases that go to the environmental court. And those cases that go to the environmental court have an actual designation when they're filed. Like if family court is a similar type of jurisdictional system, because in family court, only family court judges can hear family court cases, and the family court cases have as part of their caption FC for family court. So this will have EC for environmental court. Then it'll go to an environmental court judge. At the district court level, it's a similar situation. Let's say a district court judge is having, like Mel Fugino or Judge Fugino, who I guess became a circuit court judge, but when he was in Waimea doing district court cases, if there was an illegal taking, and it was to be a criminal case of some particular fish, then that case would come to the district court. It would have an environmental court designation, and he would hear it as the environmental court judge. But the last thing I'll say about it that has to do with specifics is, if you are designated as an environmental court judge, you can't just start hearing cases. You have to go through training that pertains to issues in dealing with the environmental court. So it's pretty specific in that way, and there are actual calendars arranged just for those cases for environmental court.
And how many judges has
There are 22 environmental court judges, and then at the district court level, there's a district court judge for Waimea, and there's a district court judge for Hilo as well as Kona. So there are 5 or 6 specific environmental court judges on this island that have all gone through training.
Okay, because I was just wondering if, there was going to be, new appointments, separate judges being appointed as environmental court judges, but that's not the case, right?
That's correct. There's no additional positions for somebody to be just an environmental court judge. And right now, there is not a judge that only hears environmental court cases.
I see. Okay,
It's
that's
mixed in with
interesting.
other cases.
Because I can see now, given the formation of this institution, as you call it, that probably when circuit court judges are nominated, that's going to be part of the inquiry, right? When they come up before the Senate and all of those other things, their environmental sensitivity.
That's a really good point, and it's already happened. Judge Kawamura, who was up before the Senate, was questioned exactly in that way about those issues. Yeah.
Right. But I'm going to tell you my concern. I'll be real frank about it. Yeah, because if it was a separate court, the environmental court, and these guys were only dealing with environmental issues, I respect you for your advocacy. You know, your reputation precedes you. You know, Hawaii's 1,000 Friends and all of that stuff, and you've been very consistent and a staunch supporter of the environment. For me, I think every politician is an environmentalist, but in varying varying degrees, right? And you know, I'm not a total environmentalist. I've stated on many occasions, you know, I've born and raised over here, and the Hawaii of 1960s is a Hawaii that I yearn for, and I miss. And I liked it much better than the Hawaii of 2015. But that being said, as Ms. Eoff brought up, you know, we have to accommodate the growth. People love Hawaii. I mean, so there has to be a balance, and what would concern me is if we had a court that was strictly devoted to environmental concerns, I mean, appointed and only dealing with that, and all the inquiries, you know, at confirmation would relate to that, then you know you would have the environmental community coming out and stacking that court, and it would make me, quite frankly, very afraid. All we ask for, I think anybody asks for, is just fairness and a balanced approach and just being very objective in interpreting the rules. So in terms of, you know, I would hope that it's not going to happen, but you have judicial activism on these types of courts. And I think it's not going to happen based on the structure that you've just described for me. And, you know, I mean no offense when I say, you know, we differ somewhat in philosophies. We still are all environmentalists. But I just had to bring those concerns.
Well, I'm glad you did, because I think you and I agree, and there isn't any question that the future of an environmental court, like any other court, say family court, for example, you know, family court judges aren't making a decision that's based on their own personal position about what the family court law ought to be. They have to follow the law. And if you're a family court judge, that doesn't mean that you're always ruling in favor of what you think is a family. Maybe
right.
Some people might say family's really the wife or the mother. Or some might say that in order to be a family court judge, you have to do nothing but family law. Mm-hmm. So with respect to the environment, this institution is not going to succeed unless the community has confidence in it. The community. It's not an environmental court like you would say the Sierra Club's an environmental organization, right? It's not an environmental court that has an agenda to be able to create law. It's not an environmental court that is meant to protect a resource.